Hi, everybody. My name is Bonnie Barclay, and I am a therapist and owner of Creekside Counseling and Wellness. And I'm coming to you today on Facebook Live for the first trauma talk in 10. So, hopefully, unpack quite a bit in 10 minutes. And today's focus is going to be on defining relational trauma. So, I first just want to start with the fact that this is not an official diagnosis, relational trauma, but it really refers to the outcome of an adverse experience that occurs within a close relationship. A betrayal by someone that loves us, that we trust, that we rely on. And so, some of the symptoms that we may talk about a little bit today are very similar to those by a more familiar diagnosis, PTSD. But to have relational trauma in and of itself does not mean that you have that other diagnosis. So, I just wanted to start with that today as we begin to move forward. So, what kind of situations or adverse experiences can result in relational trauma? Things that we've typically heard of: abuse, neglect, but sometimes even abandonment and enmeshment, which is an overly close parental relationship. And that's really simplified, but for the point of today, hopefully that will help. Although this can occur in adult relationships, this pattern of trauma often occurs when we are children. Distressing or traumatic interactions between caregivers and children during critical developmental phases. And these interactions create negative attachments and distorted self image that shape the way the child interacts with others throughout their life. The good news, if that sounds depressing, is that with therapy and a commitment to healing trauma, survivors really can overcome its effects and learn to build more satisfying and sustainable relationships. People with relational trauma find successful relationships difficult because of the mistrust, fear of intimacy, and overall insecurity because of the trauma. And these can be targeted in therapy. So, to look at those two main categories of relational trauma, we're looking at childhood relational trauma and adult relational trauma. So, most people who suffer from childhood can trace the source of their insecurity, lack of trust, and inability to form successful relationships to their treatment at the hands of parents or other caregivers. It occurs really during such a vulnerable stage of life. And as I said, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse can all lead to relational trauma, as can parental neglect and abandonment. One of the things that's not talked about as much and not seen necessarily as a trauma is inconsistent parenting. And this is an area I want to highlight further today. This is a type of parenting or caregiving that includes episodes of neglect or abuse mixed in with periods of better treatment. And this can really result in long term substance abuse, mental illness, or other issues. So, kids who are raised this way often experience confusion, uncertainty, anxiety, depression, and feelings of unworthiness, often blaming themselves when things go wrong, even developing survival skills to cope or even control their experience. Some other childhood experience that can result in relational trauma is witnessing acts of domestic violence committed by parents, ongoing medical trauma with inconsistent parental support, being rejected, bullied, or otherwise mistreated because of physical or mental disabilities, being bullied in school or on social media sites, childhood abandonment by one or more parent, and that can be for different reasons because of divorce, death, suicide, incarceration, or even desertion. Adult sufferers may carry some baggage from childhood, but it's their experiences later in life that can be a tipping point for relational trauma. Abuse, neglect, or abandonment by partners, family members, friends, employers, co-workers, peers, teachers, or even predatory strangers can be equally devastating and emotionally traumatizing. This can leave sufferers with powerful unresolved feelings of rage, guilt, shame, a sense of betrayal, and feelings of inferiority, all which can permanently affect their existing relationships and make it difficult to start new ones. Relational trauma can complicate every aspect of an individual's social life based on their inability to feel safe and secure when making interpersonal connections or forming attachments, especially new attachments. Here are some adult events that carry significant risk for relational trauma include intimate partner violence, infidelity, or what some refer to as betrayal trauma, abandonment by a spouse or partner, being a victim of a violent assault, sexual or otherwise. And all of these, the common theme here is violations of trust. This is the underlying source of relational trauma symptoms and any events, encounters, or circumstances that contain that element that could put a person at risk for this type of trauma. For some, it is the confusion, the distortion of that reality, the distortion of trust that really is the core factor here. But what makes these relational experiences traumatic? The bottom line is this: when children experience traumas and stress, it is not necessarily the trauma itself that becomes the problem. As I said, if a child has a securely attached, attuned, loving, consistent caregiver or caregivers who can support them in metabolizing the stress, digesting it, organizing and making sense of it, the child can more or less move through a trauma or stressor functionally. Remember, I've talked about it in other videos in some of my posts, is that we all have a brain an information processing system in our brain that wants to move us towards mental health. It's when these things get stuck that we struggle. And sometimes just having that loving support can really help soothe that stress in a secure attachment way that helps the brain move it forward. However, if the trauma or stressor is happening within the attachment relationship with the parent or guardian, the child therefore cannot usually rely on the adult to help them integrate and process the stress. If the attachment or stress happens outside of the attachment relationship, but the caregiving adult still fails to support the child in managing, healing, or recovering from it, a child will likely develop maladaptive or compensatory responses to organize their experience, simply because as children they don't have the resources and coping skills like we do. Maladaptive responses are numerous and varied, but essentially, if left unaddressed and untreated, they can lead the child to become an adult who has ineffective beliefs and behaviors about themselves, about others, and about the world. And the impacts of relational trauma can be varied and unique to the individual who experiences it. There's no one-size-fits-all description. There's no formal diagnosis for this. But as I said, there's some overlap at times with PTSD and other diagnoses that can bring someone in, like depression or anxiety. So what do you do with this? How do we help this along? And what I see just momentarily about betrayal trauma, one of the hard things about recovering from infidelity or betrayal trauma is our attachment figure in our partner, the one that we lean into to help us get through things as an adult, is the one that betrayed the trust, which makes that attachment wound even deeper and more complicated for healing. So, again, what do we do with this? So, there's some therapy approaches for children I want to make you aware of. Play therapy for adolescents, dialectical behavioral therapy or DBT is very effective, and family therapy to help the whole family in healing. For adults, the primary treatment that I do with adults is what's called EMDR or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. As I've said before, we really jumpstart that information processing system and help adults really heal, make connections, and address some of those negative beliefs. So I want to end with this. Your connectedness to other people is such an important key to buffering any current stressor and to healing from past trauma. Being with people who are present, supportive, nurturing, and belonging. Bruce Perry. I hope you all got something from today. Let me know if you have any questions. I just want to use this time to give you brief snippets into trauma. It's really not talked about enough, and I really feel convicted to just bring that out there so it's not such a taboo subject, that we aren't just focusing about trauma being big T traumas, but we're also aware of the other wounded parts of ourselves that need attention and care. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next week for Trauma Talk in 10. See you soon. Bye.